On the evening of November 3, 2017, the departures board at San Francisco International Airport looked ordinary. Flights blinked between on-time and boarding, travelers moved with practiced urgency, and the constant echo of rolling luggage blended into the background noise of the terminal. Among those listings was Pacific Skies Flight 619, scheduled to depart for New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport at 8:45 p.m. The aircraft was a Boeing 777, a wide-body jet trusted for long domestic and international routes. It had already completed 2 flights earlier that day without incident. To the airline, it was just another rotation. To the passengers, it was a red-eye journey across the country. To the crew, it was routine, until it wasn't. Captain Thomas Avery, a pilot with nearly 25 years of experience, arrived at the cockpit shortly after 7:30 p.m. He had flown everything from turboprops to wide-body jets and was known among colleagues for being methodical, almost quiet. His first officer, Elena Brooks, joined him minutes later, younger but sharp, recently upgraded to the 777 after years on narrow-body aircraft. They ran through pre-flight checks without interruption. Weather along the route was mostly clear, with minor turbulence forecast over the Central Plains. Nothing unusual appeared in the maintenance log. No deferred items. No open write-ups. The airplane was, on paper, perfect. Boarding began on time. Families settled in, business travelers tucked laptops under seats, and flight attendants moved through the aisles with practiced calm. By 8:41 p.m., the cabin door closed. 4 minutes later, Pacific Skies 619 pushed back from the gate. The takeoff was smooth, the climb uneventful. As the aircraft rose above the lights of California, the city below dissolved into scattered patterns of gold and white. The jet turned east, climbing steadily toward its cruising altitude of 36,000 feet. For the first hour, everything followed the script. Autopilot engaged. Fuel burn matched projections. Air traffic control handed the flight from sector to sector without complication. Inside the cockpit, conversation drifted between weather updates and small talk about schedules. At 36,000 feet over Nevada, the aircraft leveled off. The cabin lights dimmed. Passengers reclined their seats, some falling asleep almost immediately. Others watched movies, unaware that the most critical moments of the flight were still ahead. Just past midnight Central Time, as the aircraft crossed into eastern Colorado, Captain Avery noticed something subtle. It wasn't an alarm or a warning. It was a feeling, one that experienced pilots learn to respect. The control column felt slightly heavier than it should have. It wasn't dramatic. Not enough to justify a call-out. But it lingered. Avery flexed his grip, making a small correction. The airplane responded, but with a fraction of delay. "Do you feel that?" he asked calmly. First Officer Brooks checked her displays. Everything looked normal. Airspeed steady. Altitude stable. No alerts. "Maybe a bit," she replied. Nothing flagged. Seconds later, the autopilot disengaged. A single chime echoed through the cockpit. The flight mode annunciation changed. The airplane was now fully under manual control. This alone was not unusual. Autopilots disconnect for countless reasons. Turbulence. Mode conflicts. Minor sensor discrepancies. But what followed was different. The nose dipped slightly, then corrected upward. Not enough to alarm, but enough to register. Brooks glanced back at her instruments. Her airspeed indicator showed a sudden increase. Avery's showed something else entirely, a gradual decrease. 2 instruments. 2 realities. "That's not right," Brooks said. Within moments, additional indications appeared. One system suggested the aircraft was approaching overspeed. Another hinted it was drifting toward stall margins. Both could not be true at the same time. This was not a system failure. It was something more dangerous. Contradiction. In aviation, conflicting information is often more hazardous than a clear malfunction. Clear failures trigger procedures. Conflicts create doubt. Avery disconnected additional automation without hesitation. "I have the aircraft," he said. "You have the aircraft," Brooks confirmed. She reached for the checklist, flipping to the section labeled Unreliable Airspeed. Her voice was steady as she read the first steps aloud. Meanwhile, in the cabin, the change was felt almost immediately. A subtle drop ran through the fuselage, light enough to avoid panic but noticeable enough to wake sleeping passengers. Tray tables rattled softly. A few heads lifted. A baby cried briefly before being soothed. A flight attendant paused near the rear galley, steadying herself against the counter. No announcement came. Up front, Avery focused on raw fundamentals. Pitch. Power. Attitude. He ignored the conflicting numbers and flew the airplane based on what it felt like, not what the screens insisted. Outside, the aircraft was cruising through a region of thin, supercooled clouds. Invisible to the eye. Barely visible on radar. But enough to matter. What the crew could not see was a small but critical failure unfolding on the aircraft's exterior. One of the pitot tubes, devices responsible for measuring air pressure and calculating airspeed, had begun to ice internally. A heating element designed to prevent such icing was underperforming, not enough to fail completely, but enough to allow partial blockage. The result was corrupted data. The flight control computers, receiving inconsistent inputs, did exactly what they were programmed to do. They tried to protect the aircraft from dangers that did not actually exist. Automation, in this case, became the threat. Back in the cockpit, the workload intensified. Brooks continued reading checklist steps. Thrust adjustments. Pitch references. Cross-checking standby instruments. Each action was deliberate, measured. Avery kept the wings level, the nose steady. His breathing was slow, controlled. There was no room for urgency. Only precision. The aircraft shuddered lightly as turbulence increased. Not severe, but enough to amplify the sensation of instability. In the cabin, passengers grew uneasy. Conversations stopped. Phones were put away. A man in row 32 tightened his seatbelt. A woman across the aisle whispered a prayer under her breath. The cabin crew remained composed, but they knew something was wrong. Training told them not to speculate, not to alarm. Silence, in moments like these, was a tool. Air traffic control called in. Pacific Skies 619, confirm altitude. Brooks responded calmly, her voice betraying nothing. Maintaining 360. There was a pause. Roger. Let us know if you need anything. Avery exchanged a glance with Brooks. We're diverting, he said quietly. They agreed immediately. Denver International Airport offered long runways, favorable weather, and immediate support. The decision was not debated. It was executed. ATC was notified. Clearance was granted. The aircraft began a gradual descent. As the jet descended, the icing conditions lessened. Control response improved incrementally. The conflicting airspeed indications remained, but the aircraft itself felt more stable. Inside the cabin, the change in altitude was noticeable. Ears popped. A few passengers glanced at their seatback screens, noting the unexpected descent. Finally, a brief announcement came from the captain. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking. We're going to be making a precautionary landing in Denver due to a technical indication in the cockpit. Everything is under control. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. The word precautionary did little to calm nerves, but the tone of his voice did. The descent continued. Runway lights came into view. The cockpit grew quiet, focused. A firm touchdown followed by steady braking. Pacific Skies Flight 619 rolled to a stop without further incident. In the cabin, applause broke out, not loud, not celebratory, but relieved. Passengers exchanged glances, some smiling nervously, others simply exhaling. On the ground, maintenance teams moved quickly. The aircraft was taken out of service. Passengers were rebooked. Within hours, the cause was identified. A partially iced pitot tube. A degraded heating element. A cascade of misleading data. No dramatic explosion. No catastrophic failure. Just a small flaw, amplified by automation, caught in time by human judgment. The incident never made national headlines. It appeared briefly in internal safety bulletins and FAA reports. To the world, it was just another delayed flight. But for those in the cockpit, it was a reminder. Technology is powerful. Automation is essential. But when systems disagree, when data lies, it is still the human being, trained, attentive, decisive, who makes the difference. That night, over the American heartland, history almost changed course. And it didn't. Because in that cockpit, in those minutes of uncertainty, every second mattered.